This is my second video interacting with the thought of Jordan Peterson, especially as it relates to religious thought and the Bible and people's opening up to the belief that perhaps these things have something to teach us today. And what I'm hoping to do in these videos is, as a pastor, offer people the opportunity to perhaps go beyond what Jordan Peterson is doing. He's doing such a great job of showing how the Bible stories have a lot to tell us psychologically, that they teach us a lot about how to improve our lives and how to navigate the world. He does a great job of showing how these stories might teach us the right way to function, to order our lives, to work in this world. And along with that, then he's shown the political ramifications of that kind of thinking. And in a lot of ways, he's just recapturing, as he himself says, the wisdom of the past, the wisdom of the culture that we've received, which includes this religious element as a big part of it. And he's done a great job of just showing how these things are rooted in our very being. And he's made it plain that he's doing a certain level of analysis, as he likes to say, that he's dealing with a certain substrate, various terms he likes to use. What he's pointing out there, something I think I appreciate about him, is that he's recognizing that there's a multi-dimensional element to life, that life is not reducible to any one particular thing, that the danger is reductionism, and he wants to avoid that. However, he doesn't want to go beyond that particular level where he's especially competent and he feels is especially helpful for doing the very thing that he does, which is he's a clinical psychologist. What his goal is to help people carry themselves in the world in a way that leads to a better quality of life, you might say, and a better outcome for their lives. So he's really staying in the domain of his competence, which is, again, everything he's about. So, you know, 2 cheers for that. You know, I mean, it's 2 thumbs up all the way as far as what he's doing. But he always keeps coming to the cusp of saying, well, or of actually saying that he recognizes that the psychological realities that he's talking about have a corresponding metaphysical reality, or something real that they're pointing to. The reason why this way of being in the world and of handling oneself and of walking in the world works is because there's it corresponds to the way reality is. And so he uses, and when he talks about that, he uses the term metaphysical. Another term for that, you might say, is the ontological, that which has to do with being, with reality. Existential is another term that's used in a different way, just to say that there's this reality of existence, that we exist in this world that we live in, which is the world of the existentialist, is the reality that we navigate. We don't know everything. We're not cognizant of every element of the universe, but there is a reality that we move in, and there is this corresponding to the psychological, this corresponding reality out there. And he hints at, again, that he believes that there's something there. Thinking about this and what he's doing, and I've really enjoyed, and I do enjoy his insights. There's so much great stuff that he shares that way. It reminded me of when I was a chaplain resident in a hospital over 20 years ago. I was there as a clinical pastoral education student. First as a student, then as a supervisor in training. And during that time, I had opportunity to do a lot of independent study of personality theories. We were part of the training in clinical pastoral education is seeking to integrate the social sciences, both sociology and psychology, in the practice of spiritual care. Not that we would be experts in these things, but that we would be informed, at least, and that it would help us in our work. So again, I don't claim any particular special competence. I don't have the knowledge that he does, and that's not my goal. But I have been able to do some reading in Carl Jung. I did back in the day, just some of the basic compilations that there's out there. I've done some reading in these various books. So I was aware of it. And back when I did that, I got connected with a Christian pastor, uh, actually an Anglican priest or Episcopalian priest, Morton Kelsey. This is his book, Myth, History, and Faith. He actually studied with Carl Jung, went to the institute there in Switzerland, and then corresponded with him uh, by mail. And he quotes in that particular book a letter from Carl Jung where he's talking with him as an Episcopal priest. Obviously, he believes in God, and he was asking Jung about this, and Jung said that he did believe in a supreme being, but he didn't want to go much beyond saying that he did believe that. And again, kind of echoing Peterson, he just wanted to stay in his domain of competence, so to speak, and he left that kind of off to the side. Well, Kelsey, being a Christian priest and pastor, went beyond that, and he said that that these things, these instincts, drives, images that are deep within us, the archetypes that the Jungian people speak of, that across the cultures you find these various recurring themes, recurring archetypes, that he believed that there was a corresponding spiritual world. There is that beingness that is God. Some people call that being itself in the way and that's not that can sound like maybe pantheism or something like that. But what that means is simply saying that that which is the source of all being, that is not a being among beings, but is the source of all beingness, God. But Kelsey went beyond that and said that some of these recurring um, both evil and good images, gods, so to speak, point to a spiritual realm that the Bible speaks of and affirms, a realm of spirits. And so Kelsey came up with a little pamphlet, The Reality of the Spiritual World, where he really works through the psychology of Jung to say that this is pointing to the reality of a spiritual world. For many people, that's a great leap to think in those terms. But what's interesting about that is Kelsey's approach is very similar, I think, to Peterson's in that he's saying what points to something being true is how it works. And the religious viewpoint has obviously worked, and the religious teaching around spiritual reality has obviously worked. An interesting study that Kelsey did early on, I think, in his career is this book, Tongue Speaking, an experiment in spiritual experience. It's kind of interesting that the foreword is by Upton Sinclair, which I believe he was a member of his congregation. Kelsey himself did not speak in tongues, but that was at the time of the beginnings of what became known as the charismatic renewal among mainline Protestants and Catholics. It's still pretty strong in Catholic circles. And Kelsey taught at Notre Dame. And so he was aware of these phenomenon of these modern people speaking in tongues. And interestingly, he mentions that Jung had an interest in this phenomenon and had done some thinking on it. But for Kelsey, and you get glimpses of this in Peterson, that he's saying that there is something real there. And Kelsey will go the next step and say, this reality, number one, it is ultimate being, the source of all being, the ground of all being, God, that we're in contact with. But even beyond that, there are various archetypes that relate to spirit reality. And he brings up this one particular god, that the god of war and destruction, and this book is very interesting, the one Myth, History, and Faith, because he does go through a lot of the various religious myths and examines them and puts forward various ideas on them. Believe me, I don't agree with everything Kelsey says. in that book especially, I don't agree with his split between the God of the Old Testament and the Father of Jesus Christ. I don't see that big disjunction that he's putting forth there. And there are other things in his understanding that I don't really buy. I just find him more or less suggestive, at least. And that he's pointing in the fact, again, in a very similar direction of saying there is a realm that impinges upon our world, and it's something that is ingrained in the human consciousness, that this knowledge of that realm. Of course, Peterson puts forth that these images, instincts, and drives, whatever they may be, they've come out of the long process of the development of the human as he understands it, and that's his particular model of how it came into being, and that has a lot to commend it. But the actual, I mean, that is in the end speculative, and some critiques that have been made of him on the internet is, to how much is this is speculation, how much can you say for sure this is how it happened, and that's, I guess that's absolutely true. But on the other hand, what's undeniable is the universal nature of these themes. That's there. That's fact. That's, you can find throughout history. You can find through the study of the history of religions that there's this universal themes that of these various things that come up. As Kelsey will say, there are those false images that are, you can tell, are the product of some of the things that people attribute religion to: manipulation, power to lord it over people and whatnot. Not everything in religious traditions necessarily represents a universally shared reality that they're pointing to. There are other reasons for some of these beliefs or gods or images or symbols or myths, whatever you want to say. But beyond that, there are those universal themes that come through, pointing to this innate knowing within humanity of this reality that, well, Kelsey will call the spiritual world. And that's what, of course, traditional Christians especially have affirmed. There have been those versions of Christianity which have sought to accommodate a modern worldview, the worldview of where technical reason reigns, the scientific method, empiricism, the use of the senses to know reality. And in doing so, it has watered down some of the teaching of the Bible regarding these mysterious things of the realm of the spirit. And I think that's really silly, because these things aren't known in that way. The way they are known are the way in which Kelsey's pointing to, the way in which, actually, in his own way, Peterson is pointing to, whether he believes in them or not. He's saying there is this realm of knowing that humans exhibit, this religious consciousness of entities or of reality, or of a way of navigating reality where you believe these things are real. That's interesting, just in the way when people have asked him about his own belief in God, his answer sometimes has been, well, I act like I believe in God, because that's how I act, and so that does say at some level that's something that's in me. And people act as if there are these realities, this realm across the cultures. There's been that, and Christianity affirms that, says that sense that there is something beyond this realm is real. And obviously for Christians, that which finally solidifies that conviction is the teaching of the Christ, of the Christ who is captured and who is presented to us in the writings of the New Testament. And that Christ who drove out the demons in people's lives, uh, brought order to the chaos of their lives by driving out the devil, driving out that which was had them in their grip. And this continued experience of that among the apostles has convinced traditional Christians that that reality is there, and that what people have sensed as that reality is there. Now, again, that's a pretty fantastic, far out way of thinking for a lot of modern people, but I think it's fascinating because I think Jordan Peterson is at least pointing to, well, if this is actually a way of being that has worked for people, there's something to be said about that. Uh, that and acting that like these things are real and living within that world has brought wholeness to people. And that's one of the things that Kelsey points out about Carl Jung, is that he said that for Carl Jung it was the full religious system that lent itself towards the integration of the person, the fully mythological, to use the term. Now, again, many Christians would struggle over that term myth because that would seem to be saying not true. And I think Christians and the New Testament does use it in that way to speak that there are those things that aren't true and not real that people believe in. But there's another way of using myth to say the world that is beyond the empirical, beyond our being able to subject it to physical test, that can only be captured in images and symbols, and that even the Bible itself is a kind of condescending to us. A great quote in the Institutes by John Calvin. He says in there that in the Bible God lisps to us as a nursemaid or a mother does to the child, speaks kind of in baby talk. And then he says, so that we do not have so much as direct knowledge of God as of indirect. And that, I think, captures what this is saying. There's a kind of recognizing that we have true knowledge of these things, but not the kind of comprehensive, scientific, in control in the sense of having it all captured like you do when you do things in the world of sense perception. But that we do have real knowledge, and that by acting in accordance with that knowledge, we live in tune with reality, live in tune with God, in tune with being itself, in tune with life, and that Jung himself saw as people lived in that full world of the Bible. That was something that it was something integrating to their lives. And doesn't that say something? That it shows that there is a being in tune with reality, and that's at least one piece pointing to maybe we should take this seriously. We're really talking about metaphysical claims here. Back when I was going through my education, when my undergraduate degree was at a Bible college, I knew pretty early that I wanted to be in ministry. So prior to seminary, I went to a Bible college. And in the third year, or no, it was the fourth year, we took systematic theology. It was an evangelical school, and so we used an evangelical systematic theology text, Millard Erickson's Christian Theology. And in there, he begins by talking about how do you test metaphysical systems for viewing what is real. And he draws on the work of Frederick Ferret. I think his book was Language, Logic, and God. Yes, Frederick Ferret, Language, Logic, and God. And what he points out there is in the past, perhaps people have tried to show that with a kind of certainty, an absolute certainty, you might say, they were trying to prove that their metaphysical system, their metaphysical assumptions were the right ones. And he said probably a more honest approach is this one of Ferret, and I think it makes sense to me. rather than trying to prove the absolute rightness of one over another, rather look at, why not grade them and see which one is the more adequate of the others. And he gives Freitas these criteria, both internal and then external criteria for looking at an understanding of reality. We all have a metaphysic. We all have an understanding of what is real and of how reality is. And he gave some criteria, which I think are I'll just put them out there and you can see if they seem to make sense to you. As far as internal criteria, Frey said that a metaphysical system should be judged, first of all, on its consistency. Is it inconsistent? Are there parts within the system and understanding of reality that clash with each other? And then is it coherent? They may not clash with each other, but are they at least, they have to also be related and all work together as in harmony. So it's not just that they don't clash, because you could have things that are totally unrelated so they don't clash, but then there has to be a coherence. They have to all kind of fit together. So you look for that in the metaphysical system, of its ability to bring these things together internally. Externally, he says they have to be adequate to explain the evidence, and then they have to explain the full range of evidence of the phenomena of reality that we experience as we go through our existence in this world, as we live as those immersed in the world that we are immersed in, which is this world of our experience, of our existence. Someone who did a very similar thing to that is a guy named Ronald Nash. Nash was a professor of philosophy at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green, an evangelical Christian. Book I used, I think one of the classes I took in seminary, his book, Faith and Reason. He talked about the inner and outer worlds, similar to, I think, what Frey's talking about here, that there has to be this satisfactory fitting of the inner and the outer, and that what we're seeking for, there's no way that you can have a absolute kind of certainty when it comes to metaphysics, but everyone has a metaphysical assumptions. You can't avoid it. It's like you can't. You're going to make those assumptions, and so since you're going to do that, you need to have a way in which you're judging that system. And so far, this is, to me, has always made the most sense to me. And so that Ronald Nash will say that why we can't have that kind of absolute certainty. We can have what philosophers or others call moral certainty. We can have the knowledge that allows us to act with a kind of an assurance, because we're pretty sure. We've got strong reasons to believe. It's the kind of certainty that one has when one is studying history. You don't ever have absolute certainty that these things happened in history, but you can be reasonably certain that things happened in history, that there was a George Washington, even though you can't have absolute certainty. George Washington's existence is not proven scientifically, in the sense of that it's a repeatable experiment, or it's not like the laws of mathematics. And the same way with the laws of evidence in a courtroom. We would never be able to prosecute anyone if we had to have that absolute certainty. But we can have beyond a reasonable doubt, and we act on that, and then we even make some pretty serious decisions based on that. And in the courtroom, we think of some of these can be even, they affect people in very serious ways, life and death, imprisonment, but we're acting with a kind of moral certainty that based on all the knowledge we have, we made the right decision. And I think Christianity has that kind of certainty, a certainty that we can act, that we can say, there's a lot that points to this being true. The things that we're talking about right here, serve to move people in that way, to open them up to thinking that. And I think the more than one begins to explore the Christian faith and then actually live in it, they see how it fits reality. You might say the one area where people struggle the most and feel like perhaps there's an inconsistency and an incoherence, so to speak, at the very heart of Christian faith is the problem of evil and suffering in the world. And when it comes to people who don't believe, it's oftentimes where they struggle. I think there's an answer to that, but that is where it usually comes down to. If there is something where they want to, where they say that they're having a difficulty with Christian faith, but that would be for another time. All that to be said now is that as you're thinking about Jordan Peterson and you're thinking about the evidences he's giving for the validity at a psychological level, at the level of the biological for religion, I think, though he has to stop there in a sense, he's stopping there because of what he's all about and what his focus is. We all have to figure out for ourselves, now, what do I think about those other dimensions of reality, those other levels of analysis? What are my metaphysical assumptions? Is this pointing to a God? And is there evidence that in this reality of the Christ, God was acting in the world of suffering that Peterson so eloquently talks about, that this is a world of suffering, that a part of finding meaning in life is addressing suffering and seeking to minimize it. And but is the Christian faith, would say, is there evidence that God was seeking to overcome this suffering by entering into it in the Christ? And is he now at work in people's lives to energize them with that reality of Christ, that not only may they in this world experience grace in the midst of suffering, so that's not just, I mean, that's one of the things you're left with when you just stop with Jordan Peterson's view of things, is it's a very much a you do it yourself kind of thing. And the Christian claim is you don't have to do it yourself. Indeed, ultimately, because these things have ultimate consequences, you can't do it yourself, and so you need someone to do for you what you can't do for yourself. And the whole Christian claim is that the Christ did that. And that's the one thing I'd say really missing in his worldview that he's putting forward. It's in many ways a very lonely kind of well, it's a harsh world. That was part of David Brooks's column in the New York Times when he was critiquing the 12 Rules for Life. And he was asking, where is the joy? And I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's autobiography, Surprised by Joy, and that what permeates the New Testament is this experience of joy, of this inner knowing that one isn't alone in this world of suffering, where one is called to take on the role of following Christ, that I believe we're to do, as Peterson is saying, that is what we're to do. But in Christian theology, the gas, the energy, the power to do that, and to do it not just, but to do it even with joy. There's a passage in the Old Testament where they were called to a difficult task, and they were told, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And I guess I'll just stop with that. There's a lot I could continue to say, and we'll hope to say in future videos.